Good morning, everybody. Some good stuff to talk about. Kind of good stuff. Good using the term to reference the importance of the subject matter. We were talking about how the Biden administration is actually financing some of the really wild programs we talked about before that were experimental on how to fight quote unquote climate change. You might have seen recently that they are open to the idea of blocking out the sun. I did an episode on that recently. And the idea was, of course, to spray chemicals into the stratosphere to mimic the effects of a volcanic eruption, which would prevent the rays of the sun from reaching the surface of the earth. Uh, there, again, there were some weird companies involved with that, some of them tied to Bill Gates, including the one doing the airplanes. The World Economic Forum had another one using space bubbles. I'm not even joking, like a giant plastic bag in space that would prevent the sun's rays from reaching the Earth. Imagine if it just blew and like wrapped the whole Earth in like saran wrap, basically. But they are in fact looking now to finance the one to spray the chemicals into the stratosphere. That's happening. In addition to that, they're also looking now into they're at the experimental phase. So that what they're doing is they're financing the research, but they're also now looking into another program along those lines of being able to remove carbon from the air. And so they want to have the capability to pull carbon out of oxygen, essentially. They want to be able to, fight climate change by doing that. Now, you could argue that your home filter, like if you have an air purifier or if you have an air conditioner with a little screen built in, you could argue, hey, I'm light years ahead. I'm light years ahead. I put a filter on my fan and now I'm pulling carbon material out of the air. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about technology that would be a little concerning, in my opinion, especially when you're dealing with what else is it pulling out? Is it, and how do they differentiate what it removes from the oxygen? Let me show you. Well, let's talk about the Maui fires today, by the way, so stick around. Epoch Times has a story. It says Biden admin announces $1.2 billion for carbon capture projects. The Biden administration has allocated up to $1.2 billion to support the development of two large-scale direct air capture, or DAC, carbon management facilities. So they're actually building facilities to begin doing this type of thing. Sorry. It takes a minute to set in sometimes. The U.S. Department of Energy has unveiled the substantial investment, marking a significant stride towards the administration's carbon dioxide CO2 emission goals in an August 11th press release. And it says this initiative is part of President Joe Biden's Investing in America agenda, which they did a big announcement on just recently as well, which emphasizes the administration's dedication to addressing carbon pollution. The selected projects situated in Texas and Louisiana represent the first of their scale in the nation. So, what is happening right now is that, look, okay, I'll give my take on what's happening with climate change, and I'll say so a little cautiously because I know YouTube gives people strikes for even talking about this stuff. Essentially what's happening is they have a gun to the head. They manipulate the science, right? They make it so that scientists, if they say otherwise, if they say something outside the boundaries of what is deemed to be acceptable science, quote unquote, they don't get money from grants. They don't get money from the government. They don't get money through projects and universities. In other words, if you've put your life into the sciences, if you've built a career in it, you've gone to college, you've gotten your PhD or whatever you need, and you've gotten a job in the field, it's your dream job. You're getting money typically through a type of scientific research project. You're getting money to write papers. You're getting money from the university. A lot of them will work with universities. A lot of them will work on government grants. It's very rare that you'll have like private companies hiring them, but even then, typically the companies are following different protocols within that establishment. If you deviate from the narratives which are part of the political agenda, you will have that money cut off. And what do you call a scientist who's not part of a university, who's not part of a who's not part of some government research program, who can't get a job at any kind of big company? You call scientists like that, I believe they're referred to as burger rotation technicians. Maybe you're flipping patties somewhere because you're not going to be working in the sciences. If you don't get that money, you don't have a job. Plain and simple. I mean, I'm sure there are the rare instances where somebody not part of one of those institutions or getting that type of money can find a job somewhere, but they're going to be few and far between. In other words, if you don't toe the line, you don't get money, you don't have a job, and you're out of the sciences. You're pushed out, and you're deemed a crackpot conspiracy theorist. So for a lot of people who understand the problems with, again, climate change and so on, a lot of them will not voice their observances, will not voice the actual research on it. And so the ones who truly believe this whole thing is a sham, typically they'll keep their mouths shut. And those who want to play the game and get the grants and get the money, they'll be very vocal about it. It's as simple as that. I will say something controversial. It's the same thing with the evolution crowd. In fact, I know several people who are evolutionary scientists. They all acknowledge there are many gaps in it. And typically what happens is that if you want to keep a job, well, if you want to be relevant and have, scientific discussions, you need to ignore those gaps in logic. And so typically they will just avoid those gaps and have talks about the surface thing. I know many people who've worked in various different fields, were dealing with DNA, dealing with ancient history, dealing with, for example, anthropology, dealing, for example, even with like being in Madagascar, doing research on like lemurs, and because again, they're regarded as one of the anomalies, like they're regarded as like a key part of the whole evolutionary studies field. All of them privately will acknowledge there are major gaps, unanswerable gaps within the theory, that you could say make it so that basically it's no different from a religion. It's a belief. It's not based in hard, verifiable, track by track, point by point science. It requires some gaps in logic if you want to accept it. It's a religion, plain and simple. People want to believe it, go ahead, but it's not scientific. But that's the way it's touted. Of course, people would argue there is evolution within, for example, adaptation. So a species or a person doing something over a long course of time will begin to change physically through breeding and so on to adapt to the conditions. But that's different from, for example, one species transforming into another, which there's no evidence of. And also, of course, things like even carbon dating and other things like that technically debunk it, as do things like, for example, quasars and many other things. But we won't get into that today. That being said, my point is, within the scientific community, there's a lot of false science, and there's a huge margin for error that tends to be relatively accepted. Nothing is 100%. Nothing is ever absolute. And the problem we have is that things that are not absolute are defined as absolute and unquestionable. Typically, there's always a margin for error, and everybody who does scientific research will acknowledge there's a margin for error. The problem is that when people look back at the scientific studies, they tend to not acknowledge that margin for error. They tend to take the findings as being absolute. And so they box themselves in step by step until, of course, they find that they're trapped within the boundaries of a partially true reality or a false reality. Some great books on this, by the way. There's one that slips my mind right now. It was written just recently. I'll get back to you on it. The name slips my mind. Anyways, interesting stuff. That being said, of course, when you get to issues like climate change, what happens? The scientific community has a gun to its head. The scientific community is being told, this is what you have to say. This is the clergy overlooking Galileo and saying, how dare you suggest the earth is round, yes, the earth is round. I'm sorry, folks. The earth is round. The clergy and so on, looking down at Galileo, saying the earth is round and saying, how dare you suggest otherwise? And he's being punished for saying otherwise. The irony now is that the establishment has become the clergy, and the individual calling against the rigid sciences and saying, no, climate change, it's a hoax, it's fake, the earth is not round, the climate has changed many times in the course of history, and no, although there are nuances within, let's say, changes of temperature, the theory and the overall narrative is fake. And if you say that, you get canceled, you get attacked, you get Galileoed, and that's what you find happening right now. This empirical, unquestionable religion that has overtaken the body of sciences through mainly financial and political control. I would say it's no longer legitimate, old school science of what science used to be. And maybe we should call it something else, like crony science or something like that. It's not real science anymore. And that's one of the big problems we're having. It's politicized science. It's cronyism under the guise of science. And what you have with the global warming stuff and whatever they want to call it now is that not only have they created false narratives, the media has bought into the false narrative, the expert community has bought into the false narrative, the education system has bought into the false narrative, the unquestionable sciences, which are, again, based on a lot of fake information and false conclusions, and again, coerced findings written under coercion. This is taken as undeniable reality. That's the real problem we have. It's undeniable. It's taken as undeniable reality. And the problem we have is once you have people demanding change and demanding action, well, government and research programs and entrepreneurs developing new products are going to react to that and create technologies like this, like things that block out the sun, like things to capture carbon from the oxygen, to pull carbon out of the air, things that could significantly damage our lives, if not cause mass famines and mass plagues and mass famines, as have volcanic eruptions historically, on which they're basing the model for these things to put chemicals in the stratosphere to block the sun rays from hitting the earth. You're having people create technologies to respond to a false crisis, and the nature in which they're responding to that false crisis could have massive implications for not only the basic well-being of humans, but even for the basic survival of humans. And that's the stage we're at. That is the danger of how false science, influenced by politics, is then used politically and economically by people to make a buck. And who knows what other agendas they have, which can cause massive harm to humankind. And here we are. The Biden administration is financing this now, and they're building it. That being said, let's talk about some other things we can't talk about. Let's talk about all the things they say we can't talk about. And still the earth rotates. Galileo said something similar to that when he was, of course, punished for suggesting the earth was round, right? That said, let's talk about J6, and then let's talk about the Maui fires. But for that, let's go over to Epoch TV, where we walk we don't have to walk the fine line of YouTube, one which I don't deal with very well in general. But let's jump over. Let me show you a trailer first, though. We got all the J6 unreleased tapes. We've now published these in a special feature. Let me show you the trailer of that. Then we'll jump over to Epoch TV, which is 25 cents a week right now. So, folks, it's a quarter. Spend a quarter and escape from censorship and join us on Epoch TV. Let me show you a trailer of one of the things you can watch as soon as you come over. I'll show you the trailer now, then we'll go.
What was the process of actually putting this all together?
Many hours of finding the right camera angles and watching it. The first trouble started just after 1 o'clock.
45 pages, here it is right here. Donald Trump has been indicted.
Somber day for the country.
This all happened before President Trump's speech was over.
The founder of the Oath Keepers militia group is headed to prison for more than 18 years.
His lawyers didn't have this
No.
video. The video we're watching right now, his own lawyers did not
No.
have. There was a big question of what did the people do who actually did enter the building.
This is where we picked it up with the security footage that is new. At this point, the story dramatically changes.
The New Jersey man who assaulted a Capitol police officer on January 6th has been sentenced.
So this was withheld.
This was not shown to the defense.
That could be considered exculpatory evidence. This doesn't seem like what a lot of the media is showing.
It's going to change narratives no matter what your political perspective is. What we're after is the truth.
Again, folks, that is on Epoch TV, epochtv.com. Link in the description. 25 cents a week. Come join us. I'll see you over there. Right now, we'll finish the episode, do a Q&A and stuff.